Every morning began the same way. Before opening his eyes, Ethan Parker already felt tired. Not the kind of exhaustion that sleep could fix, but the quiet weight of carrying expectations that were never truly his. His calendar was full. His phone never stopped vibrating. Friends admired his reliability. Coworkers praised his dedication. His family proudly described him as someone who was always there when needed. From the outside, his life looked stable, productive, and successful. Yet beneath that carefully maintained image lived a question he had spent years avoiding. If everyone seemed happy with who he was, why did he feel like a stranger inside his own life? He had learned very early that love often arrived with conditions. Approval followed obedience. Affection appeared after achievement. Peace only existed when he avoided conflict. Without realizing it, he became an expert at reading rooms before speaking, predicting other people's emotions before acknowledging his own, and saying yes long before asking himself whether he actually wanted to.
Why is he just standing
Little by
there?
little, every compromise
anyone
felt
know him?
harmless. Every sacrifice seemed noble. Every silence appeared mature. But years of abandoning tiny pieces of himself slowly built a life where his own voice became almost impossible to hear. The strange part was that no one had explicitly told him to disappear. The process happened so gradually that it felt normal. When someone needed help, he canceled his plans. When disagreement threatened harmony, he swallowed his opinion. When opportunities appeared that excited him but disappointed others, he quietly stepped away. Each decision looked responsible on its own. Together, they became something else entirely. A personality carefully designed to avoid rejection. People called him kind, generous, selfless. They had no idea how much fear was hidden beneath those compliments, because many acts of endless generosity are not born from love. They are born from the terror of losing acceptance. Ethan wasn't helping everyone because he felt free. He was helping because somewhere inside, a younger version of himself still believed that being needed was the only safe way to be loved. One quiet evening, after another exhausting day of solving everyone else's problems, he sat alone in his apartment with the television playing in the background. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. He realized something unsettling. He couldn't remember the last decision he had made entirely for himself. Not because someone expected it, not because it looked responsible, not because it avoided disappointing someone, simply because it reflected who he truly was. The realization didn't arrive like lightning. It settled over him like fog, heavy, invisible, difficult to escape. For years, he had confused peace with the absence of conflict, but avoiding conflict had not brought peace. It had only postponed the inevitable confrontation with himself. That night, another thought quietly emerged. What if the real prison wasn't built by other people? What if, brick by brick, he had built it himself? For the first time in years, Ethan did not search for a distraction. He simply sat with the discomfort. It was unfamiliar, almost frightening, because beneath the endless responsibilities, beneath the pleasing, the adapting, the apologizing, something long forgotten was beginning to stir. His own voice, soft, fragile, almost impossible to hear, but still alive. The following morning, nothing around Ethan had changed. The traffic sounded the same. His inbox filled with the same requests. His coworkers greeted him with the same smiles. Yet something inside him had shifted so quietly that no one else could notice. For the first time, he began paying attention not to what people expected from him, but to what happened inside him every time he agreed to those expectations. The pattern appeared everywhere. Someone asked him to stay late at work. Before answering, he felt a knot in his stomach. Someone called needing another favor. His shoulders immediately tightened. A family member volunteered him for a weekend commitment. His first instinct was to smile. Not because he wanted to, because saying yes had become automatic. It was no longer a decision. It was a reflex. That realization disturbed him more than he expected. How many choices in his life had actually been his? That evening, he searched for nothing in particular. He simply opened an old notebook he hadn't touched in years. Most of its pages contained unfinished ideas, abandoned goals, places he once dreamed of visiting, books he wanted to write, hobbies he promised he would start when life became less busy. Life had never become less busy. Instead, every year brought another responsibility, another excuse, another version of himself that everyone appreciated, except him. As he flipped through the pages, one sentence caught his attention. "If I ever stop pretending, will anyone still love me?" He didn't remember writing it, but he remembered feeling it. His chest tightened. The words had been waiting for him long before he was ready to understand them. For years, he believed his greatest fear was failure. Now he saw the truth. His greatest fear had always been rejection, not rejection for making mistakes, rejection for becoming himself. The thought followed him for days. He started observing conversations differently. Whenever someone disagreed with him, he apologized. Whenever silence entered a room, he rushed to fill it. Whenever someone appeared disappointed, he immediately assumed it was his responsibility to fix the situation. It was exhausting, not because people demanded perfection, because he demanded it from himself. Then something unexpected happened. A coworker asked if he could take over another project that weekend. Normally, Ethan would have answered before the sentence was finished. This time, he paused. Only 3 seconds. But inside those 3 seconds, an entirely different person seemed to awaken. He asked himself a question he had almost never considered. Do I actually want to? The answer surprised him. No, it wasn't anger, it wasn't resentment, it was simply honesty. His voice trembled. I'm sorry. I can't this weekend. The room remained silent. For one terrifying moment, Ethan expected disappointment, criticism, conflict. Instead, his coworker simply nodded. No problem. I'll ask someone else. That was it. The world didn't collapse. No one became angry. No relationship ended. He walked back to his desk almost confused. For years, he had imagined boundaries as explosions. In reality, the first healthy boundary felt almost invisible. The real battle wasn't outside. It had happened entirely inside him. But the victory was followed by something unexpected. Guilt. Powerful guilt, as though choosing himself had somehow harmed everyone else. That night, realized why. Children who grow up believing love must be earned often become adults who feel guilty every time they stop earning it. The guilt wasn't proof he had done something wrong. It was evidence that an old survival strategy had just been challenged. For the first time, Ethan began to understand something that would change the rest of his life. His greatest enemy had never been other people's expectations. It was the version of himself that believed he had no right to exist unless he was useful. And somewhere beneath that lifelong performance, another version of Ethan waited patiently. The one he had abandoned years ago. The one that Carl Jung once called the shadow waiting to be integrated. After that first boundary, Ethan expected life to become easier. Instead, it became louder, not outside, inside. Every time he chose himself, another voice immediately appeared. You're becoming selfish. People won't like this version of you. Good people always sacrifice. The strange thing was that the voice sounded familiar. Not because someone else was speaking, because he had been speaking to himself that way for years. He finally understood something most people never notice. The harshest critic in our lives rarely arrives from the outside. Eventually, it moves in. It learns our language. It borrows the voices of parents, teachers, partners, authority figures, and painful experiences until we can no longer tell where their expectations end and our own identity begins. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Ethan found himself standing in front of an old mirror while cleaning boxes stored in his apartment closet. He stopped. Not because he admired his reflection, because he realized he had spent years looking at himself without ever truly seeing himself. Who was the man looking back? The dependable employee? The loyal son? The supportive friend? The person who never complained? Or was all of that simply the mask he had learned to wear? Carl Jung described the persona as the face we present to the world. Necessary, useful, sometimes beautiful, but dangerous when we mistake it for our entire identity. Because behind every carefully maintained mask lives another figure, the shadow. Most people misunderstand that word. They imagine darkness, anger, violence. But the shadow is much larger than that. It contains everything we were taught to reject, not only our fears, but also our confidence, our creativity, our anger, our courage, our ambition, even our ability to say no. If a child learns that expressing anger leads to rejection, anger enters the shadow. If confidence is called arrogance, confidence disappears into the shadow. If sensitivity is mocked, compassion hides there too. The shadow doesn't collect only what is ugly. It collects everything the world convinced us was unsafe to express. Suddenly, Ethan remembered countless moments from childhood. The time he cried and someone told him to be strong. The day he proudly shared an idea and was laughed at. The afternoon he defended himself and was called disrespectful. Each experience had quietly delivered the same message. That part of you isn't welcome. So he buried it. Again. And again. And again. Years later, he no longer remembered burying those pieces. He simply believed they never existed. That realization shook him. Perhaps healing wasn't about becoming someone new. Perhaps it was about recovering everyone he had abandoned along the way. Over the following weeks, Ethan began a different kind of practice. Instead of judging uncomfortable emotions, he became curious about them. Whenever jealousy appeared, he asked, "What desire is this emotion revealing?" Whenever anger surfaced, he wondered, "Which boundary has been crossed?" Whenever fear emerged, he quietly asked, "Which younger version of me believes I'm still in danger?" For the first time in his life, emotions stopped feeling like enemies. They became messengers. Some carried pain, others carried forgotten dreams. None arrived without a purpose. One evening, he wrote a sentence that would remain taped beside his desk for years. "My shadow is not the part of me that makes me dangerous. It is the part of me I never gave permission to live." The words changed everything. Because he finally understood that individuation was not the destruction of the old self. It was the reunion of every fragmented piece waiting to come home. The confident child, the sensitive teenager, the angry adult, the creative dreamer, the exhausted caretaker. None of them needed to disappear. They needed to belong. And as those forgotten parts slowly returned, something remarkable happened. He no longer needed everyone's approval, because for the first time, he was beginning to earn his own. For months, Ethan believed the hardest part of healing was discovering his shadow. He was wrong. The hardest part was allowing other people to meet the version of him that no longer lived to please them. Growth is rarely uncomfortable because we change. It is uncomfortable because our relationships must decide whether they can change with us. At first, the differences were almost invisible. He stopped answering every message immediately. He no longer apologized for having different opinions. He declined invitations when he genuinely needed rest. He spoke more slowly, listened more carefully, promised less, but meant every promise he made. Some people barely noticed. Others noticed immediately. One afternoon, a close friend looked at him and laughed. "You've changed." The words were casual, but something underneath them wasn't. In the past, Ethan would have panicked. He would have rushed to explain himself, to reassure, to prove he was still the same person everyone liked. Instead, he simply smiled. "I have." Silence followed. For the first time in his life, he allowed silence to exist without trying to repair it. That single moment taught him something profound. Not everyone misses the real you. Some people miss the version of you they could control. The realization hurt, but it also brought freedom, because individuation asks an impossible question. Who are you when approval is no longer your compass? Days became weeks, weeks became months. As Ethan continued choosing authenticity over automatic agreement, unexpected patterns emerged. Some relationships became deeper than ever. Conversations felt more honest. People trusted him more because his kindness no longer came from obligation. It came from choice. But other relationships slowly drifted away. Not because he became cruel, because he stopped abandoning himself to maintain them. At first, every ending felt like failure. Then he understood something that changed his perspective forever. A boundary doesn't destroy healthy relationships. It reveals them. Relationships built on mutual respect survive honesty. Relationships built on constant self-sacrifice often cannot. That distinction changed everything. One evening, while walking through a quiet park just before sunset, Ethan watched children running across an open field. None of them apologized for laughing too loudly. None of them asked permission before expressing joy. None of them questioned whether they deserved to exist. Somewhere along the journey into adulthood, most people lose that certainty. Not because life steals it, because little by little, they trade authenticity for acceptance. They become experts at reading everyone else, while becoming strangers to themselves. Ethan suddenly understood why Carl Jung believed individuation was the central task of a human life. It wasn't about becoming perfect. It wasn't about becoming fearless. It wasn't even about becoming happy. It was about becoming whole. Wholeness meant allowing strength and vulnerability to coexist, confidence without arrogance, compassion without self-abandonment, generosity without resentment, love without losing oneself. That night, standing alone beneath the fading light, Ethan whispered words he never imagined he would one day believe. Not everyone has to understand me. Not everyone has to approve of me. My life is not an audition for belonging. For years, he had searched for permission to become himself. Parents, friends, society, success, relationships. None of them could give it, because the permission had always belonged to only one person, the man looking back at him every morning in the mirror. And perhaps that is the quiet paradox of becoming whole. The moment you stop asking the world who you should be, you finally begin hearing the person you have been all along. Not louder, not stronger, simply without interruption. A year later, Ethan's life looked surprisingly ordinary. He still went to work. He still met friends for coffee. He still visited his family. He still faced difficult days, moments of uncertainty, and conversations that required courage. From the outside, almost nothing dramatic had happened. But inside, everything had changed. The anxiety that once followed every decision had grown quieter. Not because life had become easier, because he was no longer fighting himself. He had learned something that no achievement had ever taught him. Peace is not created when everyone approves of you. Peace begins when you stop abandoning yourself to earn that approval. He noticed the difference in small moments. When he was tired, he rested without apologizing. When something hurt him, he spoke honestly instead of pretending everything was fine. When someone crossed one of his boundaries, he responded with calm clarity instead of silent resentment. There were still people who misunderstood him. There always would be. But misunderstanding no longer felt like rejection. It simply became evidence that every person sees the world through the story they carry, inside themselves. One afternoon, while walking through the same park where months earlier he had watched children running freely, Ethan sat on a quiet bench beneath a large oak tree. The wind moved gently through the leaves. Nothing extraordinary happened. No life-changing conversation, no dramatic revelation, only stillness. And for the first time in many years, stillness no longer felt empty. It felt like home. He closed his eyes and remembered the younger version of himself. The child, who believed love had to be earned. The teenager who hid his emotions to avoid judgment. The young adult who confused constant sacrifice with kindness. He realized none of those versions had been weak. They had simply done what they believed was necessary to survive. Instead of criticizing them, he silently thanked them. Every defense mechanism had protected him once. Every mask had served a purpose. Every adaptation had helped him reach this moment. But survival was no longer the goal. Living was. That distinction transformed everything. Healing was never about destroying the person he used to be. It was about gently telling that frightened version of himself, "You don't have to protect me anymore. We're safe now." He smiled. Not because every wound had disappeared, but because they no longer controlled the direction of his life. Perhaps that is the deepest meaning of individuation, not becoming someone better, not becoming someone perfect, becoming someone real, someone who can say yes without fear, someone who can say no without guilt, someone who can love deeply without disappearing inside other people's expectations, someone who understands that compassion for others becomes sustainable only after compassion for oneself. Many people spend decades searching for themselves in careers, relationships, achievements, or approval, yet the greatest discovery often waits somewhere much quieter, behind every mask, beyond every role, underneath every fear, the person they never truly lost, only forgot. If there is one lesson Ethan would leave behind, it would be this. Putting yourself first is not the opposite of loving others. It is the foundation that makes genuine love possible. Boundaries are not walls built to keep people out. They are doors that teach others how to enter your life with respect. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is the forgotten part of your humanity asking to be welcomed home. And the journey of individuation is not about becoming someone the world will finally accept. It is about becoming someone you no longer need to hide from. Because in the end, the greatest freedom a human being can experience is not being admired. It is waking up each morning, looking in the mirror, and quietly recognizing the person staring back. Not as a stranger, but as yourself, completely, finally, whole.